first group of artists that we're going to look at today are called Dadaists, and this is a Dadaist piece. And they were anti-art, in fact. So anti-heart, anti-art. Thanks, guys, for the segue. And this is from their manifesto. Dada means nothing. So we'll just take a look at who these people are, and we'll kind of start to piece together why we're looking at them, too. So I don't know if you can see this, but we're looking at this first little time frame, the little blue time frame there. It's kind of right in the middle of World War I. A lot of people are getting really pissed off. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And a lot of the, kind of all of these locations here, New York, Zurich, Paris, Berlin, are directly affected by the war. Now, of course, New York, not so much being bombed, but it becomes a place where a lot of artists and people are fleeing to from these other places. And kind of all around the same time, all of these people kind of come together. And when I say all these people, it's not that many, like maybe 40 or 50 people who know each other, who are artists working together, and they kind of come up with this new way of presenting art. And one of the things that they're looking at also is like technological advances that are causing the war and are also creating this class divide. So they're against a lot of things. They're rejecting a whole slew of other art forms that are coming before it. One of them is called Expressionism. That's like super emotional and moody, and it's based on craft, meaning that you had to like go to a university or an academy to know how to paint like this. It's very distorted, and it's like meant to give you an emotional response, and they were like, no, that's not us. They were also rejecting something called Futurism, and Futurism loved technology and loved like steel and all of these things that were, again, part of driving the war and also driving the classes apart. Some of the Dadaists started out as futurists, but then rejected it altogether because of the things that it was represented. So it's very like, strong and optimistic about technology in the future and all of those things. It's also very much based on craft, again, and the academy. Youth, violence, cars, airplanes, trains, all of that stuff. The futurists thought that was really awesome. Again, the Dadaists did not. And this looks somewhat futurist, but this is Cubist. So this is what Picasso was doing. And again, Dadaists had like an interesting relationship. They didn't completely reject Cubism, and in fact, some Dadaists also started out as Cubists as well. But it was still too based in craft. They called it retinal art, which means that it was too beautiful for the eye and didn't really have a lot of meaning behind it. Dadaists did like it because it had like kind of pieces and parts and broke things down. And then it also used a lot of appropriation. So Cubism would go to Africa and Asia and find things from those cultures and bring those back into their art to make their pieces. So appropriation was interesting to them. And which Cubists used too, but again, they weren't really super into Cubism. So just to kind of also some more things that Dadaists were against. They were anti-art. So again, appropriation was really interesting to them because they didn't have to make it. They could just go to what someone else was doing and then just piece it, kind of cut it up and piece it back together and make it their own that way. They wanted to merge art with the everyday life. And instead of keeping art as something very elite and something that only rich people can purchase and access. They wanted everybody to be able to access that work. So they broke down the barriers between high and low art. They were really against craft and technical proficiency. They really liked lo-fi things. And again, because that's what rich people liked. They liked things that were beautiful and well-crafted. And so they just wanted to completely do away with it. So really traditional types of art form, like painting and like bronze sculpture and things like that, they didn't want to have anything to do with, because that represented the rich who were driving culture without them. So again, they didn't have, nothing was defined in terms of the medium. They used all sorts of different media and also combined a lot of different media as well. They were interested in thoughts more than the visual. And they liked things that were irrational. They felt like rationality and like the mind of systems, so government systems and military systems and all of those things were killing everyone. And so they wanted to bring irrationality to their work to show how that could break down and kind of cause a revolution. They wanted things to change with their art. So again, the rich was controlling culture through technology, rationality, and industry, and they were also controlling art because they only bought certain types of art. And so, again, Dadaists wanted to eradicate all of that. So these guys, especially these performances, this is hard to just show in a picture. So this is a performance in 1923 where they're just kind of wearing these really strange costumes, and a lot of times they would just sort of speak in gibberish. And you can also see there's like a nod to Cubism actually in the costume. But they would use theater and poetry, dance, music, all kind of put together, and they would do it in bars and clubs. They didn't, these weren't in opera centers or, large cultural centers. These were just, if you saw them, you saw them. If you didn't, you didn't. This is the only, there might be one or two other images from this performance, and it was just like, that's it. If you got it, if you happen to see it, great. If not, they did not care. We only know about this one just because of it being written about. I don't think there are any photos that exist from him just walking down the street like this. So again, just trying to disrupt everything. And by calling it art and then going out into the world, they were also breaking down what art was and what art looked like. So again, these pictures aren't doing any justice to what these actually looked like and how strange they were at the time. They also staged events, these kind of absurd events that were kind of like exhibitions, like kind of anti-exhibitions, with stuff hanging all over the place and, kind of words and labels stuck to the walls. It was meant to be very disorienting, meant to be unlike any type of art experience. If you look up at the ceiling, you can see this thing hanging on the ceiling there, and this is what that actually was. So it's a pig-headed military officer, so an appropriated costume with some words written around it. Let me see if I can. So on his chest it says, "I come from heaven on high." One of the biggest ways that the Dadaists, or one of the biggest media that Dadaists use, or most well known, were through collages, and this is where this comes into play for our breakout sections and for our studios, is because of the collaging techniques that we're learning through Photoshop. And the way that we're arranging them actually speaks to a lot of what the Dadaists were doing here. So again, using appropriation, recontextualizing each of these images so that put in their new situation with the other images, they say new things and different things than they did originally in their old contexts of magazines or newspapers or whatever. So that what they really liked to do, again, was kind of use chance of just what they happen to come across and find. And there are a lot here. And again, you know, because they were just kind of cutting these things out and putting them up there, they were using some of those formal qualities. Now, going back to last lecture when we were talking about line and value and movement and all of those things, they were, I mean, loosely, you kind of can't help but use those elements, but they weren't explicitly going for really strict composition and strict formal qualities. They were trying to break that up as much as possible. They did the same thing, so we just looked at two-dimensional, so they would also do it in three-dimensional ways too. They called these ready-mades, which just means that they would go and grab a couple of things that were already made and stick them together. So again, this use of appropriation, and also, like, especially in this case, making fun of artists and making fun of art. You know, again, we looked at this last time, and it's this signed urinal. So, you know, the question is, so who's the artist here? Is it the person who made this originally? Is it me because I signed it? Is the pedestal making this art? Why is this art? So it's all of these are, at the time, asking everybody to really question what they were doing. What is art? What is making? What is craft? Oh, I don't think I told you the story last time. So it was submitted to an exhibition. Marcel Duchamp was actually on the board of for this art location, but he didn't tell anybody that this was him because obviously his name is not Armut. And the thing for the exhibition was, we will accept any art as long as you pay the fee for entry. And he did, but wasn't accepted. And so that caused an uproar, which of course caused him to become famous, as that happens. And here's another type of ready-made, just bringing together a lot of different pre-made, prefab objects and sticking them onto each other. All of these, by the way, all three of these, the last three that we saw, the originals are gone. So they just were like tossed aside. And the artists, I'm sure, were totally fine with that. They didn't care, you know. But someone has gone through and remade these. Oh, and here's film. Oh, I have a fancy new, a student here taught me how to put the film into the thing. So this is Dadaists also used film. We won't watch this whole thing, and in fact, what I would like to do is turn that volume down. So again, just very absurd, very silly. This piece was actually, the sound to it was destroyed during, I guess, maybe World War I or World War II. I'm not sure, but the Nazis destroyed it because they called it degenerate art. So again, a lot of this art was so radical and so out there that it was done away with. Let's see if we can get to. So again, it's intentionally silly and doesn't necessarily have a storyline. And I'm turning down the sound because the sound that somebody put on this video is too silly for me. So again, when this was being done, no one was doing anything like this. All the film at the time was, very serious, sometimes very funny, of course, too. But definitely always had a beginning, middle, and end. And then one other way, kind of similar to the collage that we were looking at, another way that another medium that Dadaists were using for it to kind of get out their ideas were through zines. And what they were doing here was they were, again, kind of challenging what a publication looks like. Using kind of appropriating a regular magazine or journal and this commercial form and making it something that no one would want other than people who were already interested in Dadaism. So that was another big part of what they were doing, was trying to make work that wouldn't sell because they were against the gallery system. But actually of course, what came out of this, especially in this case, was all sorts of since they were breaking every single rule, they came up with all sorts of really great ways to use typography and new ways to think about layout. So not long after Dadaism started, it dies. It only lasts for like 4 to 6, less than a decade. The participants, which again are about 40 or 50 people across the world, kind of disagree about what Dadaism is or should be or what it should be doing. Typically, as is the case, like this kind of constant deconstruction, like you can only do that so far. And anarchy only goes so far, especially when you have a group of people who are working together. And so that's kind of an unsustainable way of working. And actually, a lot of the Dadaists were like, hey, this is actually a little negative. We kind of want to, we still want to be revolutionary, but we don't want to deconstruct everything. We want to kind of show things not necessarily optimistically, but in a more restorative way. So instead of tearing everything apart, building some things back with their artistic practices. Plus, a lot of them were like super classically trained, and I would imagine that they were like, hey, I kind of would like to paint shadows again, or whatever. So some of the Dadaists and a lot of kind of switch over into the next thing that we're going to look at here, which is Surrealism. And this was kind of the basis for this was this looking at and juxtaposing this dream life that we all have, and the unconscious and subconscious life, and reality, and kind of blending those so that they come together. So again, this doesn't look that different from our last. It's actually exactly the same graphics. But we're looking at the green up there, Surrealism. So It starts after a little bit after Dadaism ends. So you can see Dadaism starts in the middle of World War I. World War I ends, and they're like, okay, I don't know, that's over. And so then Surrealism begins, and you can see then the Second World War starts, and they don't quite make it through. I think, things get, really nasty about halfway through, and Surrealism, doesn't completely die because there are examples of Surrealism today, and we'll look at that. But as a movement, as a mentality, these things had manifestos and publications and kind of were very structured. And so I'm just pointing to kind of when the structure starts to fall apart. And again, it's halfway through World War II when things get even nastier than they started out. So looking at some of the things that Surrealism was trying to do, they were doing, a lot of what they were doing was exactly what the Dadaists were doing, trying to create a revolution, trying to break down expectations. And what they turned to, instead of the things that we looked at with the Dadaists, they were looking at fantasy and symbolism and the dream world. So things that normally people didn't access or think about, they wanted to bring it up and represent it as in reality. They wanted to kind of bypass human control. So like when you're dreaming, how things just kind of mesh in one to the next and you seemingly have no idea what's going to happen next. They wanted to bring that into their practice. So spontaneity, and then automatism, which is like this automatic drawing. And then no second guessing, just whatever the first thing that came up to their mind, that's what went on to the page or whatever. They didn't use appropriation so much because they were all creating their own, all of their own work instead of looking to other people's work to create. But what they did use was another type of context juxtaposition. So bringing together these really opposite or strange or objects that don't typically coexist and bring them into coexistence. They were really interested in the mind and the way that it worked, but not. The Dadaists were into concept-driven work, and the Surrealists were more just into just the mind, just the raw material of the mind. So what you're thinking about when you're not thinking is what they were interested in. Now, also, unlike the Dadaists, they very much used and embraced traditional art media. So they were very much into painting, very much into sculpture, very much into craft. And therefore they were very much sought after by collectors, and exhibition spaces and sales were pretty good for these guys. And they also, again, they were kind of more into restoring, so kind of going back to the basics rather than deconstructing. I kind of see the Dadaists as kind of ripping and shredding as artists, and then the Surrealists were kind of very much painting and building up and those types of things. So looking at some of the ways that they did this, so this is automatic drawings where you just kind of let your hand go wherever it goes on a piece of paper, just without really thinking about it. So it was really embracing chance and accident, which is what the Dadaists did. But it was very, kind of very irrational. And they thought that it would also kind of uncover something deeper in their psyches. So basically what this is, if you want a word for it, is scribbling. which I don't know. I've heard that if you sketch or scribble while listening, you actually retain more kind of information. That's what I've heard. Again, so I said that they used painting, and yes, most of the surrealist work is it manifests as paintings, and kind of instead of piecing together. I mean, you do see that there are like kind of these pieces being put together, but they're all built to create this one seamless-looking beast in this situation. So, they had their relationship to painting was problematic because this whole idea of chance and spontaneity was slowed down by oil or whatever they were using, and this idea of kind of just letting your hand go wherever it goes couldn't be part of it. And then, of course, the other thing that was problematic for the revolution was that people bought these. They also had another big problem. They had Salvador Dali, who he really sought after fame, and he's kind of considered one of the first, or like kind of the first art star who made himself a superstar beyond just the work itself. So again, that kind of went against if you read there are manifestos for surrealism, and this goes completely against it. But he was doing so well. People were buying so much of his work, and now he has a ton of museums dedicated to just him. I mean, he worked really hard for his status, and it broke down. It actually, surrealism just became too mainstream to maintain. Honestly, it's one of the reasons that it failed to. I mean, as a revolution. Sculpture was used. So again, these extreme, harsh juxtapositions. And these are different from ready-mades, which is what the Dadaists were doing. Again, they were just going to the hardware store and grabbing a couple of things and putting them together. Where these are very well crafted, and they're, it's kind of based on psychological tensions, and you can kind of read into it, and everybody can have their own meaning coming out of it and things like that. We've seen this before. This is our nurse. This came out of surrealism. And this is one of Dali's version of these sculptures and this harsh juxtaposition. They also used photography. So they would just get into the darkroom. Again, and so this is also different from Dadaism, because Dadaists there actually was photography, but if we're just looking at the collage, they would just kind of come in and piece things together, not really worry about formal elements. But there are a lot of formal elements to all of these surrealists. So going back again to those elements and principles that we were looking at last class, the surrealists were very invested in all of those, and this kind of seamless quality. And they were also, again, the surrealists were creating their own images. So Man Ray, who created this piece, also took the photographs. So he wasn't just going and finding negatives on the ground and then coming back in and using them in this way. He was in control of the entire process. And so the use of double imagery, again, to kind of get this idea of duality of mind, reality versus unreality, were all part of the way that they were using photography too. And just an interesting fact, when critics go back and look at surrealism, they call photography the most surreal of all media. And finally, like the Dadaists, they created publications as well. But these journals were a lot more academic and kind of institutional. And then you can also see on this layout here that the layout was very measured, and it was more about the images inside, or the images that they were using to lay out instead of the layout itself. So they were definitely a lot more structured. And also film here too. We'll watch a little bit of what a surrealist film looks like. Yeah, we'll go to here. Oh no. Yeah, we're not going to listen to that. So, if anybody knows David Lynch, anybody in here know David Lynch? By any chance? A little? Maybe? Yep, totally. A lot of David Lynch's imagery comes from surrealist film. So these are also non-narrative, but they're a little less silly. They're more and kind of kind of trying to simulate what a dream feels like, and kind of like a tense dream. The surrealists were pretty interested in kind of intensity, where the Dadaists weren't at all. So you can imagine like having a dream and a bunch of people staring at you, you know. Let's see if we can. And again, this is the craft, the editing even, and the shot composition is much higher. It has a more cinematic feel than the Dadaist piece that we looked at earlier, which was kind of just like, oh, I don't care where the camera's going to go, you know, like, it doesn't have to be perfectly framed, it doesn't have to be perfectly lit, but you can see the lighting is very beautiful. And very intentional. Everything is very intentional in surrealism. Okay. So side by side, again, they were both against or trying to press against conventions, trying to press against the rich and the poor. But kind of looking at them side by side, you know, Dadaism was very low craft, very lo-fi. Surrealism was very crafted. Dadaism used collage, like this kind of cut and paste, you know, put together or whatever. And Surrealism was more interested in seamlessness. Dadaism used appropriation really heavily, like using other people's work. And then Surrealism used, actually I should have written on here, juxtaposition, but all original work was created by them. One thing that Dadaism used more than Surrealism was performance. So this idea of like this thing that can't be captured or seen again just happens once, and if you're lucky enough to see it, that's great, and if not, you know, you're out of luck. And then Surrealism used dreams. Dadaism was very hard to sell, and then Surrealism was sold very, very well. So I'm gonna cram us in for the next 10 minutes, just FYI. So like, why do we care? Because a lot of the work that we're doing in the studio is based kind of directly on a lot of the things that both the Dadaism Surrealists were doing visually, as well as conceptually, kind of accessing things that are deep and under our consciousness, or maybe even talking about the world outside of us. And the other reason is because this is super relevant. Even though Dadaism and Surrealism died as structures, we see these all the time, everywhere. So we're just going to play a little quick game. You're going to tell me, just given what you know, and some of it can totally be, you can have a lot of different ideas about which one is which. So it's not necessarily right or wrong, but just given what you know, Dadaist or Surrealist? Nice. That's what I would say. Dadaist or Surrealist? So first, we might need to know who this is. Does anybody know who this is? Yeah, Pussy Riot. Dadaist or Surrealist? Yes. Dadaist or Surrealist? Great. Dadaist or Surrealist? This is Paper Rag. Dadaist or Surrealist? You all are great. Dadaist or Surrealist? Oh, we can turn it on.
The best that you've ever been.
You're Dadaist or Surrealist? Okay, and then one more. Sorry, this is really lo-fi. Oops. Ew, this is a terrible version of this. Dadaist or Surrealist? What? Okay, just make a case. Yeah, I agree. So make a case for those of you who think it's Surrealist, make a case for that. For those of you who's Dadaist, make a case for that. Yes, right, totally. What? The cat talking is which? Surrealist, okay. What else? Yeah. Yep, totally. Collage. What else? So yeah, I would put that with Dadaist. What else? Totally, yeah. So which one is that? What'd you say? Yeah, so like production value, super, extremely, duper, crazy high, very saleable, Surrealist perhaps, but actually using kind of like meme type stuff, like cats, kittens, and also this kind of trying to make it look lo-fi, the video behind her, so it's kind of Dadaist. It's kind of like both. It's kind of like interesting. Anybody, anything else? Okay. What? Stop. Make it stop. Raise your hand.